The studio lights at CBS were the kind that produced real heat, the kind that made makeup run and turned a 3-hour taping into an endurance test. That was the price of broadcasting to 70 million people. Everything had to be perfect. The lighting, the staging, the pacing, the appearance of effortless professionalism under pressure. CBS Studios, Los Angeles. March 1974, Friday night, late night, the hour when America wound down and tuned in. Johnny Carson was not just a television program. He was a national ritual, a tradition, American culture happening live every night, in real time, in living rooms from coast to coast. People watched Carson to laugh, to relax, to fall asleep to something familiar and comfortable. That was the compact. That was the expectation, including on this particular Friday, especially on this one. Bruce Lee sat in the guest chair. It was his second appearance on Carson that year, and he was becoming a recognizable presence for American audiences, a familiar face they were still in the process of fully understanding. They were learning who he was, learning what he represented, learning that Kung Fu was not a film device invented by Hong Kong cinema, not a trick of camera angles and choreography, but a genuine martial discipline with real philosophical underpinnings. Bruce was there to continue that work, to keep building the bridge between what American audiences assumed about martial arts and what they actually were, to demonstrate, one late-night appearance at a time, that Eastern practice had standing in American culture. That different did not mean inferior, that Bruce Lee belonged in their homes and on their screens. He wore a dark suit, simple, well-cut, nothing that announced itself, just a polished professional who happened to be Chinese, who happened to have spent his life mastering Kung Fu, and who happened to be systematically dismantling every barrier and stereotype Hollywood had spent decades constructing. He was relaxed that evening, comfortable in the format. This was his third Carson appearance, and he knew how it went. Johnny would ask about current projects, about martial arts, about philosophy. There would be a demonstration, some audience participation, some laughter. Then it would wrap. A professional evening of television with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Johnny Carson leaned back behind the desk, the famous desk, the one that presidents and movie stars and cultural figures had sat across from for over a decade. But he was mid-question, asking about a potential follow-up to Enter the Dragon, about Bruce's plans for the coming years, about where he saw martial arts cinema heading. Bruce was answering with the fluency he'd developed for exactly these conversations, taking complex ideas and making them land for a general audience without stripping out their meaning, making Eastern philosophy accessible to people who had never encountered it except through his films. The audience was engaged, not politely engaged in the way audiences sometimes are when they're simply waiting for a commercial break, but genuinely attentive, leaning in, listening. This was different from the usual rhythm of late-night programming, the comedy bits, the celebrity promotion, the musical performances. There was real substance in the conversation. Bruce at his best was an educator who never announced himself as one, and the audience could feel the difference. Then, someone in the audience shouted, loud, aggressive, cutting straight through the conversation. "That's bullshit!" The room turned, everyone searching for the source. The cameras held on Bruce and Johnny for a moment while the entire studio tried to locate who had said it. This was not how Carson audiences behaved. They were vetted before entering the building. They were briefed on expectations, no outbursts, no interruptions, no disruptions of any kind. The rules were clearly communicated and consistently followed. Whoever this was had just broken every one of them. "Kung Fu is fake!" The voice grew louder, more aggressive, more committed. "Bruce Lee is a fraud. Everything he shows on screen is movie tricks, camera angles. Choreography. It has nothing to do with real fighting, real combat. It's performance. It's lies. Someone needed to say it. Someone needed to come here and call him out. I'm doing it. Right here, right now. Bruce Lee is fake and I can prove it." Security began moving immediately. Their job was simple. Locate the disruption, remove it, restore order, keep the broadcast on track. That was the protocol. That was what they were there for. But Johnny Carson raised his hand and stopped them. He was smiling. The particular Carson smile that appeared when he recognized something, an unexpected moment that live television occasionally produced and that no writer's room could engineer. He had built a career on understanding when to let those moments breathe instead of shutting them down. "Hold on," he said, addressing security and the audience at the same time. "Let's hear what he has to say. If someone wants to challenge the legitimacy of Kung Fu, if someone wants to make that argument, let's put it on the table. Bruce, would you be willing to engage with this? To address his concerns directly? Make it a conversation? Make it something worth watching?" Bruce paused. The situation had no clean exits. A confrontation on live national television, one that turned defensive or emotional, one that made martial arts look reactive, could damage years of careful, patient reputation building in a single broadcast. But declining carried its own cost. Declining would read as avoidance, as confirmation that the critic had a point, as evidence that kung fu could not withstand scrutiny. Both outcomes were damaging. The only variable was which kind of damage he was willing to accept. "All right," Bruce said quietly. "Let him come up. If he has questions, I'll answer them. If he has doubts, I'll address them. That's what martial arts teaches. You don't run from what comes toward you. You face it, with discipline, with control, with clear thinking. Let's do that." Carson signaled to the floor. "Bring him up. Get him a chair. Let's make this a real conversation." The cameras found him as he came down the aisle toward the stage. He was enormous, 6'7", 350 pounds, and not in the way that number sometimes implies softness. He was muscular, physically imposing in a way that was immediately apparent to everyone in the studio. His name was Jake Sullivan, the crusher in professional wrestling circuits, and he had spent 15 years working mid-card billing in a profession where the difference between mid-card and main event was the difference between a career and a calling. 15 years of being the supporting act, of watching other people get the moments he believed he deserved, of grinding through a profession that had never given him the recognition he felt he had earned. That kind of career, sustained over that length of time, produces a very specific type of resentment. Jake Sullivan had developed it fully and directed it with precision. The fact that a Chinese actor doing martial arts films had become a larger cultural figure than a working American professional wrestler with 15 years in the business offended him at a level that had long since stopped being rational. Bruce Lee's success felt, to Jake, like a correction that needed to be made, like an error in the order of things. America should celebrate Americans. The entertainment industry should elevate people like Jake. The cultural conversation should be about wrestling, not kung fu. Jake had come to the Carson set that night to realign things, to expose Bruce, to force him to either prove that his martial art was real or admit publicly that it was not. Either outcome served Jake's purpose. Either way, Jake finally became someone worth talking about. After 15 years, finally. He climbed the steps onto the stage. The audience reacted visibly to the physical contrast. 350 pounds against Bruce's 140, 6'7" against 5'7". Jake had clearly thought about this. The visual alone made his argument before he opened his mouth. He would tower over Bruce, physically dominate the stage, make Bruce look exactly like what Jake was claiming. A small man who looked dangerous on film because film was controlled, because camera angles were chosen carefully, because opponents cooperated. A stagehand brought a chair and placed it next to Bruce. Jake sat in it and spread out, occupying as much physical space as he could, making the size differential as visually apparent as possible. Johnny positioned himself between them, attempting to hold the frame of a television interview around something that had already started moving beyond those boundaries. "You have strong opinions about kung fu and about Bruce Lee," Carson said. "Make your case. Bruce is here. He'll respond. Go ahead." Jake leaned forward. "Kung fu is fake. It has always been fake, and it will always be fake. It's choreographed movement dressed up to look like a fighting system. It's performance art with a marketing problem. Real fighting is wrestling. Real fighting is boxing. Real fighting is what happens when you step into competition against someone who is actively trying to beat you, someone who is not cooperating, not making you look good, not following a script. Bruce Lee doesn't do that. He doesn't compete against real opponents. He makes films with choreographers who are paid to make him look dangerous. That is fraud. That is a lie being sold to the public, and I came here specifically to say so. Bruce Lee is fake. Kung Fu is fake. All of it is fake." The audience shifted visibly. This had gone well past the territory of a debate. This was a public accusation of fraud, delivered on live television to a national audience, directed at a man sitting 3 feet away. It demanded a response. It demanded that Bruce defend his reputation, his art, and everything he had spent his career building. Bruce kept his voice level and his expression composed. "I understand why you hold that view. Competitive sports, wrestling, boxing, do test fighters in ways that are genuine and demanding. I'm not arguing otherwise. But martial arts were developed for a different purpose. And not a lesser one, a different one. They exist for self-defense, for personal discipline, for the development of a practitioner against his own limitations, not against a competitive opponent in a structured sport environment. The testing is different because the purpose is different. That distinction doesn't make one system real and one system false. It makes them different practices with different applications. Both can be legitimate. Both develop real capability. The question of why they can't coexist is one I'd genuinely like to hear you answer. Jake's response was a short, dismissive laugh. Because the distinction you're describing is exactly what frauds use to avoid being tested. I actually fight people. I grapple with opponents who are trying to take me down, and if I fail, there are real consequences. You fight actors who are being paid to lose. If Kung Fu is a genuine fighting system and not a collection of pretty movements, prove it. Fight me, right now, in front of 70 million people. Show this audience that your techniques work against an opponent who isn't cooperating, against real size, against real strength, against someone who is actively trying to stop you. Prove it or stand up in front of this country and acknowledge that I'm right. The studio went completely silent. The format had just collapsed. This was no longer a debate segment on a late-night talk show. This was an open physical challenge delivered on live broadcast to a man with no training partner, no preparation, no protective equipment, and no controlled environment. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was something that needed to be shut down immediately. As Carson tried, "Gentlemen, this is a talk show. It is not a venue for—" "Stay out of it, Carson!" Jake stood up. He used his full height deliberately, physically reorienting the entire stage around himself. "This is not your conversation. This is between me and Bruce Lee. Between someone who actually fights and someone who pretends to. Bruce, I'm asking you directly. Are you going to demonstrate that Kung Fu works, or are you going to hide behind the set and the cameras and the fact that you're a guest on a television program? What is it going to be?" Bruce looked at Carson, at the cameras, at the audience. He understood exactly what the moment was asking of him. Refusal would be read as confirmation. The 70 million people watching would take it as evidence that Jake's accusation had been accurate. Acceptance carried its own serious risks. Injury, an outcome that went wrong on live television, a moment that did more damage to everything he had built than Jake's words ever could. There was no option that was simply good. There were only degrees of bad, and he had to choose between them quickly. "I have no interest in fighting you," Bruce said, "not because I'm afraid of what happens, because a fight proves nothing of value. It doesn't establish which martial art is superior. It doesn't validate or invalidate a philosophy. It produces a winner and a loser and nothing beyond that. That is not the kind of proof that means anything to me, and it is not something I'm willing to stage on television, in front of an audience that includes children, as though violence were an appropriate mechanism for establishing truth. A fight is not an argument. It is not evidence. It is a fight and nothing more." Jake reached over and grabbed Bruce by the collar, without warning, without wind-up. He used his grip to lift Bruce slightly off the chair, making the physical disparity as visible as possible to every camera in the room. Too many words, too much philosophy covering up the simple fact that you are not willing to be tested. I am done with this conversation. I am done listening. It is time to find out what is real and what is not. He pulled his free hand back, open palm, moving toward Bruce's face. Not a strike intended to injure, a slap, calculated to humiliate, to make Bruce look helpless and passive in front of a live national audience, to turn the accusation into a visible, recorded, undeniable fact. The hand came forward. Bruce's hand moved faster. He intercepted Jake's wrist using a Wing Chun trapping technique, neutralizing the strike and controlling the arm in a single motion. Simultaneously, his other hand drove a straight punch into Jake's solar plexus. Not a full-force strike, a controlled one, precisely placed, precisely timed, but sufficient. Jake's breath left him completely. His eyes went wide. His grip on Bruce's collar released. He stumbled backward, unable to breathe, unable to process what had just happened or how it had happened that fast. 350 pounds, stopped and destabilized in approximately 3 seconds by a man 200 pounds lighter. The size differential that Jake had spent the entire segment pointing to had just been rendered entirely beside the point. Jake did not stop. He recovered enough to charge, all his weight, full momentum. Driving forward, trying to close the distance and take the encounter to the ground where his mass would become the determining factor. It was the correct instinct for a wrestler. Get Bruce down, and the physical reality of the situation reasserts itself. Weight becomes dominant. The outcome becomes predictable. Bruce sidestepped, minimal movement, just enough to redirect Jake's momentum past him. As Jake went by, Bruce's leg swept low and connected with his ankle, catching it at exactly the right moment in the stride. A fundamental technique, uncomplicated, but timed with precision that turned Jake's own forward momentum into the mechanism of his fall. 350 pounds of muscle went down hard onto the hardwood stage floor. The impact was felt throughout the studio, not just heard, felt, in seats, in the floor itself, using the bodies of everyone present. This was not choreography. This was 350 pounds of mass hitting a solid surface at speed, and there was nothing staged about the way it landed. From the moment Jake charged to the moment Jake was on the floor, approximately 5 seconds. Security moved in immediately, multiple guards converging fast, taking hold of Jake as he struggled to get back up, restraining him, pulling him toward the backstage area. Jake was shouting as they moved him. "He attacked me. You all saw it. Bruce Lee attacked me. I want him arrested. I'm pressing charges. I'm going to sue everyone in this building." His voice carried out of the studio and faded as security moved him through the backstage corridor and out of the building entirely. Johnny Carson looked into the camera. His expression communicated everything he was already calculating. The network exposure, the legal questions, the PR damage, the regulatory implications, the fact that this had just happened on a live broadcast that was still transmitting. He gave the cut signal. CBS killed the feed. From the moment Jake's hand moved toward Bruce's face to the moment the screen went dark in 70 million homes, 7 seconds. 7 seconds of footage that transmitted live before anyone at the network level could stop it. 7 seconds that went out before the decision was made that this could not continue to broadcast. The screen went black, and CBS moved into damage control. The studio audience had seen everything that followed. The aftermath. Bruce steadying himself, production staff responding, lawyers arriving on the floor almost immediately. See, the controlled chaos that follows when live television produces something no one in the building planned for and no one in legal had approved. Before the audience left the building, they signed non-disclosure agreements. The network's position was unambiguous. What had happened in that studio would not be discussed publicly by anyone who had witnessed it. The show would move forward. The incident would not be acknowledged. Some people talked anyway. It is difficult to keep something of that magnitude entirely contained, regardless of what documents people have signed. The story moved through personal networks, told to close friends, passed along, accumulating variations and additional detail as it traveled from person to person. The specific accounts differed. The core of the story remained consistent across every version. A 350-pound professional wrestler had attacked Bruce Lee on the Carson set. Bruce had defended himself. The encounter had ended quickly and completely. CBS had cut the broadcast after 7 seconds. Bruce declined to discuss it in any forum. Every time the subject came up in an interview, he described it as an unfortunate incident, said he had responded as anyone would respond to a physical attack, and moved on. He had no interest in making the story larger than it was. Martial arts did not need that kind of validation, and he was not going to provide commentary that would turn a defensive response into a promotional narrative. CBS never broadcast the footage. The network never publicly acknowledged that the incident had occurred. The institutional position was silence, and the mainstream press largely left it alone. The story did not appear in major news coverage. It existed instead in the spaces where it could not quite be suppressed, in martial arts circles, in the conversations of people connected to someone who had been in that studio, in accounts passed between practitioners who had reason to care about whether the techniques were real and the practitioner behind them was genuine. Jake Sullivan's professional career did not survive the night. No wrestling promotion had any interest in booking someone who had created a liability situation on a national broadcast. He had arrived at CBS studios to establish, in front of 70 million people, that Bruce Lee was a fraud. He had instead provided the most direct possible demonstration of the opposite. Jake was finished in the industry before the weekend ended, and he faded into exactly the kind of obscurity he had spent 15 years trying to escape, not despite having challenged Bruce Lee, but because of it. Years later, people asked Johnny Carson directly whether the incident had taken place. He confirmed it, carefully, with evident legal awareness of what he was saying and how he was saying it. He said Bruce had responded to a physical attack with force that was appropriate and proportional to the situation. He said Bruce had not initiated anything, had not sought the confrontation, and had remained composed throughout, not only before the attack, but during his response to it. He described what he had witnessed as genuine mastery, and he distinguished it from simply winning while maintaining control, while clearly working to minimize damage, while staying within the boundaries of what the situation actually required. He said those 7 seconds, the ones CBS had cut away from, had demonstrated, more clearly than any film or demonstration could, that Bruce Lee was exactly what his audiences had believed him to be: real, capable, a practitioner whose screen work was grounded in something that functioned under actual pressure against an actual opponent who was not cooperating. The 7 seconds became part of how Bruce Lee was understood by the people closest to martial arts. Not a documented, archivable, retrievable part. No footage circulated publicly, no official account was ever published, no network record was made accessible, but part of the account that practitioners carried and passed forward. The incident answered, in the most direct terms possible, the question that skeptics had always raised about Bruce Lee: whether the speed was real, whether the techniques worked, whether the man behind the films could perform under genuine pressure what he demonstrated in controlled environments. The 7 seconds answered all of it. Jake Sullivan became, in time, a cautionary reference. The wrestler who walked onto the Carson set to expose a fraud and was escorted out of the building by security a few minutes later. The man who had believed that size was determinative and had been shown in real time and in front of a national audience that it was not. The person who had wanted, more than anything, to finally be someone worth talking about, and who had achieved exactly that for exactly the wrong reasons. Bruce never revisited the subject. He had said what needed saying through his response, and he considered the matter complete. The footage remained locked, or unpreserved, or simply gone. CBS had made its institutional decision, and it held. The 7 seconds did not resurface, but the memory held in a different way. The people who had been in the studio that night carried a specific, unambiguous recollection. They had watched a man with every measurable physical advantage, height, weight, reach, 15 years of professional training and grappling, initiate an attack on live television and be stopped, controlled, and put on the floor in a matter of seconds. They had watched Bruce Lee remain composed from the moment Jake sat down in that chair to the moment security removed him from the building. They had watched the distance between the accusation and the reality collapse completely, in real time, without staging, because without choreography, without any of the controlled conditions that Jake had spent the entire segment pointing to as the source of Bruce Lee's apparent capability. 7 seconds. That was what CBS allowed to transmit before the feed went dark. 7 seconds from the moment Jake moved to the moment 70 million screens went black. In those 7 seconds, the argument Jake Sullivan had spent 15 minutes constructing was answered in full. The footage was gone. The memory remained. And for the people who had been in that studio, no additional documentation was necessary. They had seen it. They knew what it meant. And they did not forget it.